They called her a criminal, but she was just a girl of delicate soul, crossing the border with bleeding feet and a heart made of paper. The desert didn't ask for her name. It only took her water, her shoes, and the last picture she had of her mother. No one knew she was 6 months pregnant. No one cared that the child inside her kicked each time the sun burned hotter, or that she walked mostly at night to avoid the shadows that wore uniforms and spoke in cold commands. Her name was Alma, which means soul in the tongue her mother taught her. But to the world she entered, she was just another body in motion, another illegal trying to slip through a crack in the empire. They didn't see her hands shaking when she hid behind a cactus. They didn't hear her whisper the psalm her grandmother used to sing, "He will cover you with his feathers." All they saw was a number, a file, a woman to be judged before she was even heard. She wasn't running from the law. She was running from the silence that comes after your brother is shot, after your cousin disappears, after your father never comes home from work again. She didn't cross for a dream. She crossed because everything behind her had already turned to dust. If you've ever felt forgotten or blamed just for trying to survive, stay here with me. This story wasn't born to be pretty. It was born to be told. The night Alma gave birth, the sky didn't weep. It stayed still, as if holding its breath. She found a patch of dry earth behind a broken fence, her back against a rusted pipe. She bit into the sleeve of her own blouse to keep from screaming. There was no midwife, no medicine, no mercy. Just her, the moon, and the rhythm of pain that came like waves crashing against her ribs. The baby was born in silence, too quiet, too blue. Alma panicked, rubbed his tiny back with trembling fingers, whispered prayers in 2 languages, until finally, a cry, weak but alive. She had nothing to wrap him in, so she took the shirt off her back, the one she'd carried across 3 countries, the one her sister gave her the night she left. She tore it gently, wrapped the baby tight, kissed his forehead, like a mother writing a goodbye letter with her lips. And then she did something no mother should ever have to do. She placed him near a building with a flag, right where the cameras could see, right where the air was cooler, right where anyone might find him before the heat returned. She walked away barefoot, without looking back, because if she did, if she heard him cry again, she would have run back, and they both would have disappeared. But that baby, wrapped in that shirt, he was her hope, not her shame. And still, the judge would call it abandonment. But heaven saw something else. Because that night, in the silence between 2 worlds, a mother made a sacrifice so holy, even the angels bowed their heads. But that cry, it echoed in a place she couldn't reach. And the next morning, the sirens came. The sun wasn't up yet, but the desert was already watching, still, suspicious, like it knew something terrible was about to happen. She had barely made it past the road, dust still clinging to her ankles, blood dried on her thighs. The shirt, gone. Her baby, gone. But she kept walking, one step, then another, like a prayer in motion. She didn't scream when the lights found her, didn't flinch when the engine roared behind her, didn't beg when they yelled in a language she only half understood. She just lifted her hands, slow, calm, like a leaf surrendering to the wind. The agents were 3, white, tall, armed. One held a baton, the other a plastic zip tie, the third a question she could not answer. Name! She opened her mouth, but the word got stuck between her teeth. Her name was Alma, but in that moment, she was no one. The silence wrapped tighter than any handcuffs could, because silence is heavier when no one wants to hear your truth. So they wrote her down as female approx 25, undocumented. Not mother, not victim, not survivor. Just a file. They didn't ask if she'd given birth. Didn't see the blood, didn't notice how she limped with every step. One of them laughed, said something about how they always show up pregnant, and the others chuckled. But she didn't react. She just stared at the crucifix hanging from the rear-view mirror, the same one her grandmother used to kiss before every meal, They took her fingerprints, photographed her face, marked her skin with numbers, and when she looked into the lens, she didn't see herself. She saw the door closing behind her. Forever. They put her in a van. No windows, no goodbye, no questions. And as the engine growled forward, Alma leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and whispered the only thing she had left. Seja ok for Deus. Cuida dele. Whatever happens, God, take care of him. But what she didn't know was that someone had seen her. Inside the immigration center, time moved like thick syrup. No clocks, no windows, only buzzing lights and cold stares. Alma sat on a plastic chair, arms crossed over her empty belly, staring at the floor like it could open and swallow her whole. The room smelled like sweat and bleach. Sobs floated in the air like ghosts. A child cried somewhere behind a wall, the kind of cry a mother never forgets. That's when she noticed her, the woman in the blue blouse, clipboard in hand, hair tied too tight, eyes tired but not unkind. A social worker, or something like it. She looked at Alma, paused, then walked past, like the rest of the world. But something in her face changed, a flicker of doubt, like she recognized her or remembered something she wasn't supposed to feel. The woman glanced down at her clipboard, then back at Alma, and in that flicker was the beginning of everything, because what she didn't tell anyone was that she'd seen the baby that very morning, wrapped in a torn shirt, placed carefully by a wall, eyes open, skin warm, still smelling of salt and life and fear. She'd seen him before the officers did, before the cameras, before the story changed hands, and instead of picking him up right away, she froze. Maybe from shock, maybe from fear, or maybe because deep down she knew whoever left this child didn't do it out of hate. She did it out of love. But she didn't speak up. She let the narrative be written by men with badges, men who didn't know what it meant to choose your child's life over your own arms. Now, here she was, staring at the girl who had walked barefoot into the fire, staring at a mother whose only crime was believing someone would save her son. And in that instant, the clipboard felt heavier, like it carried not just forms, but sins. Her mouth opened, but the room called her away. She walked out again, just like before. But this time, her fingers trembled, her heart ached, and she knew if she stayed silent again, she'd never forgive herself. What she did next changed everything. They put her in a cell with no clock, no mirror, no way to measure time except by the ache in her bones. It was cold, too cold for a woman who had just given birth, but she didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't ask for anything, just sat there, arms crossed over her stomach, trying to remember the weight of her baby boy. There were other women in the cell, some asleep, some staring, some whispering names of children they hadn't seen in weeks. No one asked Alma why she was bleeding. No one offered a blanket. No one said her name. But in the corner, beneath the steel bench, there was a book, old, worn, the cover peeling, the pages soft from the touch of many hands. A Bible. She picked it up slowly, like lifting a sacred thing, and when she opened it, a scrap of cloth fell from the middle. It was red, torn from a dress or a baby's shirt, tied around a verse, underlined in shaky pen. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. She pressed the cloth to her lips, closed her eyes, and breathed like someone drowning, grasping the surface just for a moment. That Bible became her anchor, her pillow, her defense, because in that place there were no windows, no sunlight, only the voice of God and the memory of a baby crying in the wind. She read the Psalms out loud, whispered them like lullabies, not for her, but for him, wherever he was. One night, an officer opened the door and tossed in a sandwich. Didn't look at her, didn't speak, but Alma didn't touch it. Not because she wasn't hungry, but because hunger was the only thing keeping her awake, keeping her from forgetting why she was there. The silence wrapped around her like a second skin. It tried to convince her she was alone, forgotten, erased. but the Bible whispered otherwise, and somewhere deep in her spirit she felt something stir, because hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just keeps breathing. But when they opened that door the next morning, everything changed. They brought her to court in chains, hands bound, ankles tight, as if she were a threat and not a mother. The courtroom was white, too white, sterile, like a wound pretending not to bleed. The judge sat high, lips painted red, eyes sharp and bored, as if she'd heard this story 100 times before. She glanced at the folder, didn't bother looking at Alma, didn't ask if she spoke English. She just began. Case number 81247, illegal entry, child abandonment. Each word hit like stone. Thrown without mercy, without curiosity. There was a translator, but he mumbled, words flat, rushed, like someone trying to finish a bad dream. Alma sat still, didn't blink, didn't plead. She wasn't asking for pity. She just wanted someone, anyone, to ask her why. But the judge didn't ask. She lectured. "You women," she said, "you always run from your responsibilities." The room froze. Even the translator paused. Alma looked up, for the first time, and the pain in her eyes. It wasn't rage. It was a mirror showing that judge exactly what she didn't want to see. A woman who chose love over safety. A woman who suffered without making a sound. The public defender didn't look much older than Alma, but he looked tired, too tired to fight. He said something about deportation, something about limited options, something about at least she's alive. And just like that, her fate was sealed. Not by law, not by truth, but by weariness. The gavel hit the desk. The echo hung heavy. Detained pending deportation, no bail. But in the back row, one person didn't stand, didn't move. The woman in the blue blouse, hands clenched, face pale, eyes wet, and in her pocket, a flash drive, a file she wasn't supposed to keep, a video of a baby being found, wrapped in a shirt, placed with care, not abandoned, delivered with faith. And in that moment, she made a choice. She stood and said one word that changed the air. Objection. The word dropped like thunder in a church. Objection. For a second, no one moved. Even the judge blinked, as if the sound had come from nowhere. But it came from her, the woman in the blue blouse, the one who wasn't supposed to speak, the one whose role was to observe, sign, stamp, walk away. Now she stood tall, hands trembling, voice firm. The courtroom stirred, a murmur, a silence broken. The judge narrowed her eyes. "You're out of order, miss." The woman didn't answer, not at first. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the flash drive, held it like it was holy. "Your Honor, I have video evidence that contradicts the narrative of abandonment." She walked forward, each step an act of rebellion, each breath defying every rule she'd sworn to follow. The bailiff moved to stop her, but the judge raised a hand. "Show it." And so they did. The room darkened, the screen flickered, and there it was. A baby, still red with birth, wrapped carefully in a shirt, placed with intention at the threshold of a building with the American flag flapping behind it. There was no panic, no recklessness, no cruelty, only a mother, doing the unthinkable, in the hope that someone would do the impossible. Alma looked away. Her body shook, but not from shame, from remembering. The courtroom went silent. The judge stared, for once, unsure. The gavel didn't move. The lawyer didn't speak. The woman in the blue blouse cleared her throat, her voice softer now. She didn't abandon him. She trusted us. But trust is a fragile thing in the hands of a machine. And some people weren't ready to believe, because when the video ended, the judge leaned forward and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, not the kind that forgives or understands. It was the smile of someone who's worn the robe too long, someone who forgets that justice is not a throne, but a bridge. The judge folded her hands. "So she left a newborn child, alone, in the open, and we're supposed to applaud her?" No one answered, not even the woman in blue. because some smiles are traps, and some words are blades. The judge went on. Video or not, the facts remain. She entered illegally. She abandoned her responsibility, and now she wants the system she ignored to show her mercy. She leaned back, red lipstick unshaken, voice dry like desert bone. We are not God. We are a court of law. But Pastor Elijah would tell you that's exactly the problem, because mercy doesn't live in books. It lives in the trembling hands of mothers, in the cries of children left between walls, in the faith of a woman who left her soul behind so her child could live. The public defender stood finally and said one thing. My client requests to speak. A gasp, a pause. The judge nodded, and Alma rose. No translator, no script, just a voice, quiet, cracked, that had carried generations. She didn't speak in English. She didn't need to. She spoke the tongue of her grandmother, of her land, of the lullabies that filled her lungs when the world forgot her name. She told them how she crossed rivers, how her baby came too early, how she wrapped him with the only thing she had, her shirt, her hope, her prayer. She said his name, Isaias. And when she finished, there were no dry eyes, not even behind the bench. But the judge didn't flinch. She wiped her glasses, cleared her throat, and said, "We'll reconvene in 48 hours. Until then, she remains detained." The gavel fell again, harder this time, like thunder without rain. And as Alma was led away, the woman in the blue blouse followed, because there was one more truth she hadn't yet revealed. A truth that lived in a sealed envelope and bore the fingerprints of a child. The detention center didn't sleep. It hummed, low, metallic, like the breath of something not quite alive. Alma lay on a cot too thin to hold her dreams. The Bible still beneath her pillow, her hands crossed over her ribs, as if holding her son in memory. She hadn't eaten, not because she couldn't, but because she feared that if her body forgot the ache, her soul might forget the reason. Across town, in an office that smelled of ink and stale coffee, the woman in the blue blouse sat alone. Her name was Miriam, a name from the old scriptures, a name her mother once said meant rebellion or redemption, depending on how you walk. She walked both roads now. Before her sat a sealed envelope, marked with a case number, forgotten in the shuffle of bureaucracy, left unopened by those too busy to care. But Miriam cared now. She peeled it open with fingers that trembled. Inside, a letter, written in crayon, and a copy of a birth record, issued not in a hospital, but in a shelter, signed by a nurse, stamped by a volunteer. It listed no father, just a mother's name, written in shaky print, Alma R. And the child's name? Isaias. There was a note, written by a caretaker weeks earlier. Child found wrapped in woman's shirt, eyes alert, no signs of trauma. Said to have been placed carefully with intention. We believe mother feared for his survival. Recommend immediate investigation of asylum grounds. Miriam read the lines again and again. Then she unfolded the letter drawn in childish scribbles. There was no full sentence, only this: I have a mama. She loves me. Crayon heart below it. Miriam wept. Not loudly, not tragically, but like someone finally hearing the truth that had been whispered all along. She photocopied the record. She packed the letter, and she prayed, not like a woman with power, but like a woman who had seen it misused for too long. Because now she knew what they called abandonment was actually the purest form of faith. But she wasn't the only one watching that envelope, and someone didn't want it to reach the courtroom. The hallway smelled of bleach, harsh, sterile, like it wanted to erase the presence of suffering. But pain has a way of lingering, even in places meant to forget. Miriam walked fast, folder clutched tight to her chest, eyes fixed on the courtroom doors ahead. But just as she reached for the handle, a hand blocked her path. A man, grey suit, polished shoes, eyes like frost. That document is sealed. Miriam didn't answer, didn't blink. He held out his badge, one of those agents who speak in policies, not prayers. We've been instructed to review all new evidence before it enters the record. She looked past him, to the courtroom, to Alma, already seated, head bowed. She remembered the boy's letter, his tiny handwriting, the heart, and something inside her broke open. You don't get to rewrite this one. She stepped around him, or tried, but his hand gripped her shoulder. Firm, hard. Don't make this political. She turned, voice low. This isn't political, it's maternal. The doors opened. The judge looked up. Miriam walked in. Alma lifted her head, saw her, and for the first time since the desert, Alma smiled. But the man in the suit, he wasn't done. He made a call, whispered words into a phone. Too quiet to hear, too dangerous to ignore. Because there are systems, and there are stories, and when those two collide, only one survives. The judge took the folder, glanced at the documents, paused at the crayon letter. Her face changed, slightly, barely, but it changed. The room held its breath. Then she leaned forward. Miss R., you said your son's name is Isaiah? Alma nodded, eyes wide, voice shaking. See, the judge turned to the lawyer, to Miriam, to the room. Then maybe we need to start this case again. But outside that courtroom, in the parking lot dark with shadows, a car door opened, and someone stepped out. Not to help, not to heal, but to silence. Because the truth was out now, and not everyone was ready to let it speak. Miriam didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her bed, hands clasped, Bible open but unread. The letter from Isaiah still on her desk, next to a flickering lamp and a cup of cold tea. She felt watched, not by God, but by men, the kind who wear badges on their chests and fear in their hearts. At 2:17 a.m. came the knock, soft, measured, not neighborly. She froze. Her soul knew before her ears did that this was not a friendly hour. This was the hour when cowards move in silence. She walked to the door slowly, her bare feet brushing the hardwood floor like whispers. Another knock, louder now. She didn't open it, just pressed her palm to the wood and whispered a prayer. Then, a voice. Miss Ramos, we'd like a word about the case you filed today. She didn't answer, but her hands moved, collected the papers, the original documents, the letter. She stuffed them into a manila envelope, slipped them into her purse, and backed away from the door. She knew this game. She'd seen it before, in the eyes of deported fathers, in the files that disappeared before morning, in the women who signed silence in exchange for peace. But not tonight, not with Isaiah still waiting, not with Alma still locked away. She opened the window, climbed out barefoot, onto the fire escape, into the night. The knock became pounding, the door cracked. But by then, she was gone, down the alley, heart racing, envelope tight in her grip. Running, not away, but towards something sacred. She didn't have a plan, just one destination, the church, the place where her mother used to kneel, the place where stories couldn't be erased. The doors were locked, but faith has never needed keys. She sat on the steps, held the envelope to her chest, and waited, until dawn, until bells rang, until she heard footsteps, soft, slow, and familiar. Because someone else had come back too, and this time she wasn't running alone. In the morning, they brought Alma to the courtroom again. She wore the same beige uniform, the same chained wrists, but something in her eyes had changed. Not fear, not hope, something older, like resolve, like prophecy. The judge sat differently too, not because she had changed, but because the evidence had. On her desk now, the birth record, the crayon letter, and the silence that no one could deny anymore. The man in the suit stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes narrow, waiting, not for justice, but for obedience. The hearing began. Miriam sat in the front row, hands still trembling. Beside her, a woman no one expected, old brown skin, eyes like storm clouds. A retired nurse from the shelter where Isaiah had been found. She held no documents, only memory. And when the judge called her forward, she spoke with the voice of a witness, not a victim. She described the baby, how clean he was, how carefully he had been placed, how Alma's name was whispered by a child's voice in his first days. She looked straight at the judge. That baby was not abandoned. He was delivered to us with reverence. The courtroom shifted, like air being pulled into the lungs of truth. The judge didn't speak for a long time. She just stared into the letter, as if trying to read more than words, trying to hear what faith sounds like when written by tiny hands. Then she leaned back and said, "We will rule on asylum eligibility tomorrow. Until then, Miss R. remains in custody." The gavel fell again, but this time it didn't sound like an end. It sounded like thunder before a long-awaited rain. As Alma stood to be taken away, she looked at Miriam, at the woman beside her, and then at the man in the suit. Their eyes met, and in his, she saw it. Not power, fear, because truth, once spoken, has a hunger, and no badge can silence what heaven intends to reveal. But that night, as Alma returned to her cell, she found something strange. The Bible was gone, and in its place, a folded piece of paper with a threat written in ink and a name she hadn't heard in years. They thought the cell was silence, but even silence has breath. Even silence can whisper secrets. Alma sat on the edge of the cot, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the paper left in place of her Bible. It was rough, unmarked on the outside, but inside, one name, just one. Magdalena. She dropped the page, as if the ink burned, as if it reached backward, into a time she had buried under layers of desert and prayer. Magdalena, her sister, the one who stayed, the one who said goodbye through tears and a half-finished lullaby, the one she left her child with before the final crossing. Because that was the truth, that was the part no court ever heard. Alma didn't abandon Isaias at the wall. She handed him, wrapped in her own shirt, to her sister, a plan made in whispers and desperation, a chance, a lifeline. They had rehearsed it for weeks. The drop-off point, the timing, the way Magdalena would place him near the flagpole so the cameras could record it, so no one would know that a mother's hands had never let go. But now someone knew. And this paper, this name, was not a warning. It was a threat, because Magdalena had vanished 6 months ago. Right after the footage surfaced, no message, no sign. Alma had feared the worst, and now the worst had found her. She pressed her hands to her face, trying not to sob, trying to stay small, because in that prison, emotions were punished. Tears were weakness. Grief was fuel for those who fed on broken things. But grief does not die quietly. It grows, it swells. And that night, Alma did not sleep. She stared at the name on the paper until it blurred. Then she folded it again and tucked it inside her uniform, close to her chest, like a wound, like a shield. Because now she knew someone had been watching from the beginning, not just her, not just the baby, but Magdalena. And that meant someone else had the full story, and they were willing to bury it, but not for long, because Pastor Elijah would say, "When the truth knocks, you best open the door, even if the whole world's trembling behind it." And in the early hours, before the sun touched the chain-link fence, a guard slipped a note beneath her door. No words, just a time, just a place. And a symbol, a crucifix drawn in ink. Alma picked it up, closed her eyes, because whatever waited for her in that room would either set her free or bury her for good. The room was not part of the prison map. It was lower, darker, built into the foundation of the building like a secret. 2 guards walked her there, silent, expressions hollow. One held a key that didn't match the other locks. The other wore no name tag. And Alma knew this was not protocol. This was power. The door creaked open. Inside, a single bulb swaying overhead, a table, 2 chairs, and across from her, him, the man in the grey suit. No badge today, no courtroom air, just a face too calm, and a folder already open in front of him. He gestured for her to sit. She didn't, so he spoke. "Do you know what your sister did after placing the child?" Alma's stomach clenched. She said nothing. He opened the folder wider. Photos, blurry, from a parking lot, from a checkpoint. And then one photo that froze her blood. Magdalena, standing beside a border patrol van, head bowed, hands behind her back. "She was taken," he said, "and the footage you've all seen was edited, shortened, to remove unnecessary details." Alma's hands tightened into fists. He continued, "You were not supposed to be more than a headline. Another case, another deportation. But someone interfered. And now," he leaned forward, "now you've made noise." He slid a paper toward her. A confession form, pre-written, typed in English, blank line at the bottom. "You sign this, you leave in 72 hours, deported, no trial, no court." He paused. "You don't sign, your sister's file stays sealed, and that baby, well, who knows what happens next in foster care." She stared at him, then down at the form, then at the crucifix drawn in the corner of the note she'd received earlier. And slowly, silently, she reached into her uniform, pulled out the tiny strip of her shirt, the one Isaias had been wrapped in, held it up. "This is what I signed with." Her voice was broken, but clear. "Not your paper, not your lies." He didn't flinch, didn't blink, just leaned back and clicked something under the table. A red light turned on, a camera, and Alma understood. This was the recording, the final trap, to catch her in fear, to rewrite her story again. But instead, she lifted her head, looked directly into the lens, and spoke, in Spanish, with her whole chest, with her whole soul. She told them everything about the crossing, the baby, the plan, the sister, the truth, and then she ended it with words that could not be edited. "No me avergüenzo, yo confié en Dios y todavía confío." I am not ashamed. I trusted God, and I still do. The room was still. Even the man in the suit seemed rattled, but before he could speak, a knock, loud, firm. The door opened, and in walked Miriam, holding a flash drive, and behind her, a federal investigator. One who didn't work for the judge, one who had been watching everything, because somewhere between the crucifix and the camera, the truth had been recording all along. And this time, it wasn't going to disappear. They thought that silence would break her, that chains would bend her, that absence would eat her alive. But silence became her prayer, chains, her testimony, and absence. Absence became the place where God planted something eternal. They moved her to another room after the confession. Not a cell, but not freedom. A holding space, no bars, just waiting. That holy, terrifying place where stories shift. Miriam sat beside her, hands clasped. The flash drive now in federal custody. The truth no longer hidden in shadows or folders, or the lies of men who thought no one was watching. They waited for the investigator to return, for the call from Washington, for the verdict that wouldn't come from a robe, but from a reckoning. The judge was gone, stepped down that morning. Medical leave, they said. But we both know it wasn't her body that failed, it was her conscience. The man in the grey suit was removed from the case. He didn't speak, didn't protest, because when systems rot, the worst of them slither away in silence. And as for Alma, they asked if she wanted to sue, if she wanted revenge, a public statement. She declined because her justice was not made of headlines, or money, or courtrooms. Her justice was this, a letter delivered to her by hand, stamped in blue ink. Asylum granted. She didn't weep. She didn't shout. She just stood, quiet, whole, hands trembling, heart full, because victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it breathes. The day she walked out of the detention center, the sky was gray, but open, the kind of sky that feels like a blank page, waiting for ink, for wings, for something too fragile to touch the ground. Isaias waited on the other side of the fence, in the arms of a foster mother, wrapped in a new coat, but still holding the shirt scrap she once tore with shaking hands. She walked toward him, slow, reverent, and when their eyes met, Something ancient passed between them, not words, not even tears, just recognition, as if the earth itself whispered, "You made it." She held him again, for the first time in almost a year, and he did not cry. He only leaned his forehead to hers, like they were finishing a sentence that never needed speaking. Miriam stood a few feet away, hand over her mouth, watching a miracle unfold without trumpet or noise. She later said that moment was the only sermon she ever needed. Alma didn't stay in the city. She moved north, took a job cleaning offices at night, enrolled Isaias in a preschool where the teachers learned his name quickly, where no one asked about borders, only about favorite colors and stories before nap. She walked everywhere, quietly, always in long sleeves, always with a cross around her neck. Not because of fear, but because some wounds become part of our worship. At night she would sit by the window, Bible in one hand, Isaias in the other, and together they would sing the lullaby her grandmother once whispered, "Aunque yo ande en valle de sombra de muerte," even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. And Isaias, who now could say his own name, would always smile at the end and whisper, "Mama." And that was enough. That was everything. Because trancaram ela atrás das grades, achando que isso apagaria sua voz. But the story found another way to fly, through courtrooms, through witnesses, through silence that refused to stay buried, through you. Pastor Elijah, voz suave, intima, final. If this story touched something deep inside you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because some truths are not meant to be shouted. They're meant to be whispered until the whole world finally listens. Because sometimes faith looks like a baby wrapped in a torn shirt, and a mother walking into the desert with nothing but God between her and the night. And that, my child, that is not abandonment. That is love. Fim.